Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. In this episode, we have Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast talking about classes in D&D. I do some more work with Foundations, a world-building tool, and, of course, Tales from the Dragon Slayers.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Jason here. So, I think the proliferation of classes is kind of crazy. Really, you could easily take OD&D with fighting man or fighter, cleric and magic user, and work with your GM to make those into anything you need. You really don't need to have all these classes. I know some people like them, and in some systems, I guess they make sense. But, like you say, at some point, not only are they cutting into the niche protection, which I'm not as worried about, but it's really hard to balance so these classes are equal to each other. I mean, we see this when we get to Rifts, right? So in Rifts, once you add in classes in all the world books, you could be a glitter boy or a dragon in the main book, or you could be a Russian villager, or a barmaid, or a saloon bum, out of the, Rifts Russia and the New West books. So it's kind of silly when you look at some of these, because there's not only no balance, but a lot of these new classes are inferior to the class they kind of came out of. So I don't know. I think at some point it gets silly. If you have your four main classes, because really, even with Race's class, a halfling is kind of a fighter thief, a dwarf is basically a fighter, when you look at BX. And, the elf is a magic user fighter. But, which I'm fine with, but honestly, you can do like OD&D, the original game, and your dwarfs and thieves your dwarfs and halflings are just fighters, and your elf switches as needed between adventures. So, I don't know. But I'm an old grognard, old fuddy-duddy, so what do I know? Take care.
Thank you, Jason. Hearing you talk about riffs in the various books and how some of them made classes out of what some people might consider mundane occupations for an RPG made me think back to the first Star Wars MMO back in the 90s. I think it was called Galaxies. I don't remember. But I just remember, I never played it, but I remember reading about it in various gaming magazines and how it was very difficult to qualify to be a Jedi, which sounds similar to original AD&D, how difficult it was to be qualified to be, say, a paladin. But that it was so freeform in what the game was that some people opted to just be, say, a bartender or a bar owner, or a store owner of some sort, or a trader or smuggler. They weren't really interested in sort of the bigger part of the game, getting into the adventure part of the game, but just someone living a life. And the game was freeform enough in what it had in terms of, I don't know if they called them classes or jobs or professions, but whatever it was very freeform in what it did so people could do that. I think one of the things that having just a large number of classes out of the gate to go, and especially if you add that to a large number of races, or if you call them species, some of them call them species now, and a large number of professions or backgrounds that you can add in, I mean, that's great for established role players, but for bringing in newer players, that's a little harder to parse to get started up with, because you almost have to go in with a concept of exactly what you want to be and how you want to build the character to even make the choices to start making the character to begin with. Whereas if you just started off with 3 or 4 kind of general uh, classes or backgrounds or jobs or whatever, you could start off kind of simply and generically, and as people played and it gained experience and then began making decisions for characters, they can make a better decision of what they wanted to do. And I think it would help in all three aspects of role playing, whether you are simply role playing, ROLL, and you're rolling the dice. In that case, you want your character to be able to do something better than maybe every other character in your party. If you're running 4 or 6 people in a party, you want to have something that you can hang your hat on, that when you make decisions, whether it's combat skills or non-combat skills, that when you roll those dice, you have a better chance of doing it than anyone else, because now you have that. I think in role playing, if you're just ROLL, you're treating it more like, say, a skirmish war game. That kind of niche protection is actually probably where it would be most important in that style of play. On the other hand, if you're doing role playing, ROLE, in the first kind of definition where people say you're inhabiting the character, you're being the character, you have the background, and you're making decisions of what the character would make. A lot of that is going to come more from, a background or a a little bit of the history of your character before they started adventuring. But you want to layer that in with class and race. But you would want, again, if you have so many different choices that they're blending together, it's difficult again to get that individual, because that in that style of play, that's what you're wanting to play. You want to play that specific individual. And then, of course, in the other ROLL, the role of that you have in the party, it becomes kind of, where do you fit a team style? Are you the bruiser? Are you the mastermind? Are you the face? Are you the technical expert? And again, having a choice of a solid line between classes would help you do that as well. And again, maybe I'm just being, as you, the old fuddy-duddy grognard. These people, when they're starting off with a dozen classes, I remember in my day, we were lucky to have 4 classes and we were happy for it. But thank you again for the call. Thank you again for the feedback. Getting back to Foundations, a world-building game. The last card I drew was Beneath the Seas. Create an aquatic or amphibian species that live in or near a body of water. This is meant to be cousins of the first peoples, which I created at the Suvaria, a migratory and herding peoples. So I came up with the Malar. The Malar harvested the Hinga fish, chasing them in the deep water. Eventually, they followed them to the deep kelp forests in the Bay of Kongor. And this is a large body of water on the northern side of the continent I drew, with the opening of the bay opening towards the east. They became more at home in the water than on the land, building 2 settlements, one on the coast at the mouth of the Quarim River, and the other out in the bay where the kelp thins out and the migrations of the Hinga come and go. So the next card is The Undying. Create a subspecies or subculture who use magic to become near immortal. Or mark the site of an undead ruler who lies forgotten in a vast tomb. So I believe this is really the first card I've drawn that gives me any kind of a choice. Yeah, it looks like this is the first card with a choice. I guess that makes sense, with it being also the first card dealing with magic that I drew. It's an interesting prompt. The second one, mark the site of an undead ruler who lies forgotten in a vast tomb. So the ruler's undead, which means still presumably, functioning, but is in a tomb and lies forgotten. So that kind of implies that they were trapped in the location where they are at by whatever turned them undead as well. So they could not function as the ruler of of a territory or a kingdom or a people anymore. But you would think that an undead ruler would still be ruling. It would be one of those eternal or near eternal kingdoms. So I think I'm going to go with that prompt. Uh, on my map, the Suvarir are kind of in the northeast corner of the continent. They have mountains most of the way around them, with sort of a small break along the northern side and then a larger break along the western side. And just to the south of those mountains, for a previous card, I drew a settlement beside a lake with some forest beyond it and a river coming to it. So I think this would be where the kingdom was. Maybe I'm thinking a breakaway group of Savaria that adapted more of a raiding style, or just simply got more aggressive. And this leader kind of banded them to create a small empire. Well, this being a continent, probably a fairly large empire for that area, and that they took over that area, but that the peoples who created this settlement to the south eventually rebelled against them and performed some sort of, perhaps this was the first time the Savari encountered magic, and these peoples either called on their god or gods, or used a magic ritual themselves to kill but somehow keep alive this leader. Perhaps the leader was meant to be destroyed, but had some sort of magical protection that they had picked up. Perhaps that the Suvari did know a little of magic, but just enough to protect themselves in some ways from it, using some part of nature, perhaps some part of one of their beasts to ward off magic, to ward off evil spirits, to ward off curses. And the curse was meant to end this empire, to end this subjugation. But what ended up happening was instead of being killed, the ruler was turned undead, but was forgotten. His peoples forgot him. They forgot who he was. They forgot what he led them to be. And so they returned to their previous, more peaceful ways. It was almost like the years of the empire were erased from their memories. And being a migratory people, they probably had less in the way of established literature, established writing. They may still have a writing system, but it may be based on materials that are quickly destroyed. They're used to simply record things or to create messages to pass back and forth, and then over time the elements destroy them, so that they don't have a vast library somewhere or multiple libraries where they keep knowledge stored, since they're always on the move. So then these peoples would have taken the ruler and unable to destroy him, and probably in the process, perhaps the magic which keeps him alive also makes him fairly powerful. They imprison him somewhere, but were able to try to put him to sleep, or perhaps it's a cycle of sleep and wake that didn't have to be established now. And I'm going to put it on up in the mountains near the source of the river that this settlement is built along the lake from. So let's draw another card. I have a flame in the sky. Describe the seasons and the celestial bodies that shape them. So that's another one that's probably going to need a little bit of thought, because nothing jumps immediately to mind. But I'm going to ponder on that and pick up the next time. And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. Having spent the last 8 episodes discussing the movement of tribes of humanoids across the landscape of this world, we're turning back to the adventures of the Dragon Slayers. It's been a while since I've done kind of a wrap-up episode, and this seems like a good time to kind of have that onboarding place for people who may be new to this story, who have only started listening to the podcast recently, and just to give a summary to catch people up with where we were before tracking the humanoids all over the place. So 118 days ago, not roughly, 118 days ago, as of the last time I spoke about the Dragon Slayers, a red dragon named Vexenture had moved into a frontier area of a human-dominated empire. He ambushed a gold dragon, took over the lair, and began rampaging across the countryside. After roughly a week of this, determining what was going on, troops from a frontier fort, Fort Ettrarch, went out and began trying to drive the dragon off. And not too long after, some specialty units from that same fort, plus adventurers, continued to sally out of the fort, looking to confront the dragon and end its rampage. They all failed. Roughly a month into the rampage, as word continued to filter out into the interior of the Empire that this was continuing to go on, Sir Gus, Katya, and Bernie, and a couple of hired archers, Harl and Quinn, set out to the frontier area to try to aid eliminating the dragon from the area. As they traveled, they were joined by Sven, Cudgel, and Edgar. In the meantime, Vaxenture attacked the fort, but was driven off just barely. Approximately 10 days later, Gus and his party arrived. By this time, the fort's commander had decided he could spare no more troops, needed to keep what he had to garrison the fort, and the adventurers around had decided that discretion is the better part of valor. After filling up on provisions, Gus and his party began exploring the area, attempting to find signs of where the dragon could be. They had a short delve into an abandoned keep that had been used along the King's Road down toward a city in the valley as a guard post for that road. There they had a handful of encounters, obtained some magic items, but were still a first-level party when they spotted the dragon a day later. Following the dragon, over the course of the next few days, they finally tracked down the dragon lair, 59 days after the dragon had first began its rampage. On the 60th day, they set up an ambush, and against all odds, they killed this huge ancient red dragon. But in the process, Sven and Bernie died. However, among the dragon's treasure, they found a ring of 3 wishes, and Katya was able to wish them back to life. They sought an area nearby the dragon's cave to secure the treasure better than they believed that they could in the dragon's lair, and unable to find it, decided that they would begin taking it to that keep, as they had found some secret rooms that they thought could keep it hidden as they moved back and forth bringing it. Over the course of moving the treasure, they encountered dwarves, orcs, and ogres, and they had a brief scare when they found a brigand force was camping out at the keep. However, the brigand force moved on and had not discovered the treasure during the short time they were there. They had to go into town to get more supplies, and when everyone had returned to the dragon's cave with some of the treasure still to be moved, in the middle of a deadly storm, they encountered another group of orcs. However, the orcs ended up being wiped out by a tornado. With more and more creatures moving back into the area with the dragon no longer active, and knowing that during their trip to the fort to get more supplies, they had to send messages to Gus's family and let the fort commander know that the dragon was dead. They knew that soon others would be coming out from the fort and that they could probably not move all of the treasure before then. So they made took one last load of treasure and moved into the keep and began exploring it and clearing it out. Though not before they had a scary encounter with hill giants at the dragon's cave, but were able to placate them by finding them some food. Early on in their explorations of the keep, they encountered another party under the leadership of Prior the Paladin and Michael the Fighter and their hired men, and they were joined by them to help clear out the fort. They also were joined by some troops sent by Gus's family, that Gus had sent some of the wealth that they had recovered from the dragon's lair to help hire and bring to them, with more promised to be on the way. Those troops arrived, along with Katya, who had been training in the fort with a magic user there, just in time for another band of orcs to attack the party's forces at the keep, but they were able to drive some of them off and either kill or capture the rest. In the process, Michael died, but he was brought back to life by a wish in a magical pool that they had found in the keep. A few days later, as exploration continued of the keep, a group of soldiers arrived from the fort on their way further north to clear out another keep that had been taken over by gnolls. Part of the granting of possession of the keep that they were clearing out included helping keep the road clear in this area and helping with other needs to help clear the road. So Gus and Edgar, along with some of the party troops, joined the troops from the fort to continue north to confront the gnolls, as the rest of the party continued their work within the keep. The military expedition discovered that a group of mercenaries had confronted the gnolls, who had assembled a coalition of humanoids, the humanoids I've just been talking about, and had managed to survive but were forced to retreat. But in the process, that coalition had broken up, though they did not know that at the time. So the force with Gus and Edgar in it continued and attacked the gnolls, who had assembled a slightly smaller force to work with them, and they were victorious, able to kill or capture all of the gnolls and their allies. Meanwhile, when Katya had arrived with the troops, she had also brought some clerics and her mentor, because Cudgel was obviously under the influence of a cursed ring. They were able to aid Cudgel in ridding himself of this ring, and were going to take it back to the fort for examination, analysis, and research. Cudgel was also going to begin training himself, and Prier was going to escort them because during their exploration of the keep, they had encountered another magical pool, and he had lost some of his ability scores, had them lowered, and it took his paladinhood away from him, and he was going to seek guidance from his order. However, just before this group could reach the fort, they were attacked by a group of werewolves, and Prier was killed, along with one of the clerics. The other cleric escaped, and Nantor was able to teleport away with Cudgel, who had fallen but was not dead, and Prier's body was later recovered by a group of troops from the fort. When news reached the party in the keep that Prier was dead, Michael was almost inconsolable, and Katya, along with him, let him know that she wished that they could have helped Prior as well, that he was still alive, and she felt a warm sensation from a talisman that she had been unable to rid herself of, and in the fort, Prier revived. Gus and Edgar, while returning with some of their troops, leaving others to help keep the other keep occupied until more fort troops could take over that duty, encountered some mercenaries. The mercenaries from the merchant caravan, they'd been ambushed. Edgar, who is a druid, can't stay with the party, or he and Gus both can't be with the party simultaneously for long because of their difference in alignment, and he's begun making plans once the mercenaries escort the remainder of the merchant caravan to the city they were going to. When they return, they're going to join him, and he's going to seek a mentor himself. Gus and Edgar and some of the troops returned to the keep on day 118, where we left them. Edgar's plans to leave sometime soon, when the mercenaries arrive, have been made known to the party, and the party is making plans to expand their military force because they have lost more forces to the attack of a dire wolf just outside the keep, and they are spread pretty thin, patrolling the parts of the keep that they've explored, and keeping the road open, and having enough troops on hand for possibly more expeditions like they had to dispatch the gnolls, plus the losses they've taken in numerous battles as well. Meanwhile, Prier is traveling back to the keep to rejoin the party. Also, a group of gnomes who had been scattered within the keep during the dragon's rampage when they had taken shelter there, has finally been reassembled, and they are preparing to leave. Edgar has just volunteered that when the mercenaries arrive, he will help escort them back to their home in the mountains. So plans are being made. There's still much of the keep to explore. And as we have seen with the humanoids, the world is still turning outside of what the party is doing. So who knows how that will intersect with what they're doing. Within the keep, they've encountered bandits and orcs and bugbears and a group of dwarves. They've had problems with piercers. They've encountered berserkers and also some parties of other alignments which they have released into the world. They've also acquired many treasure maps. They are aware of a group of hobgoblins that have taken up residence between them and where the dragon's cave is. And unbeknownst to them, another group of orcs has moved into the dragon's cave and has made friends with the hill giants that the party had encountered earlier. So if the party ever thinks to try to acquire the rest of the dragon's treasure, there will be that. Oh, and they also encountered a colony of giant ants with an intelligent queen with psionic powers. So there is that. So I will finish off with day 119, which counts as a rest day for the party, taking a break from exploring and their military expedition. The party took a day off from exploring to keep the keep further, but it was not a complete day of rest. Katya and Sven engaged in negotiations with the queen giant ant. Their intent was to leave the hill of the keep to the party and establish their colony in the hill of caves found to the west. Gus, Harl, and Quinn spoke to Idle and Briscoe. Idle is the head of the military units that the party has hired, and Briscoe is their Castellan of their new base of operations. So Gus, Harl, and Quinn spoke with Idle and Briscoe about the options for bolstering the party's forces and recruiting a workforce to rehabilitate the part of the keep that was explored. Bernie, Edgar, and Michael were involved with planning the return of the gnomes to their home in the mountains, using maps of the surrounding area and knowledge of creatures encountered in recent days. There was also discussion among the dwarves about whether some of them would be included in the expedition, while others remained behind to help collect their comrades further in the depths of the keep. Later in the day, the keep was once again thrown into chaos by the surprise arrival of Prier just after their evening meal. So a lot going on. For those of you who have been following for a while, I hope you don't mind the synopsis. For those of you who are newer, I hope you have some kind of idea what's going on. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact me. The contact information is coming up now. The opening theme of this podcast was Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both from Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. If you have any thoughts or feedback, you can get in touch with me by leaving me a voice message on my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. That's 864-209-1441. Or through SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. That's www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. Or you can send me a message or an audio file on Discord, where I can be found the Pink Phantom, or through email, phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. That's phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. I don't have to play or read your feedback on the podcast if that is not your preference. Just let me know.